Hey friends, welcome to Flight Test Tech. I'm Josh. Today we're going to be showing you how to build the brand new FT Mini Explorer. Now the FT Mini Explorer is a fantastic way to get in the hobby. It builds quickly and it's also incredibly versatile with its ability to go from a 2-channel to a 3-channel to a 4-channel experience when you use the Sport Wing. Also, if you're scratch building along with us and you're an FTCA member, you can download the plans as a free perk for our paid members right now if you're seeing this video. The tools that we're going to need are pretty simple: hot glue gun, pliers, tape, a barbecue skewer or two from our kit, and a screwdriver and Allen key. Let's go ahead and get our materials in order and we'll get started. So laid down before us here, we have the main pieces of our FT Mini Explorer here. The first thing we're going to start with building is going to be the wings. So we can take everything but what you see here and put it to the side. The first thing we're going to want to do with our wings is pop out all the pieces. We'll identify them and then we can start our building. Now that we have all the pieces popped out for our wings, we're going to go ahead and identify them. First, we have our main wing section. We have our left and right spars. We have the piece of foam that's going to go underneath the bottom of our wing to not only help center it, but also reinforce it. And then we have our dihedral gauge. You're also going to notice that I kept a couple pieces of scrap foam on my right-hand side here. This is so I can smear glue without burning my hands. Now, if you're scratch building this off the free plans that are available through the FTCA, one thing you're going to want to keep in mind is that both these wings are designed in 2 pieces. The reason for this is because when we manufacture here at Flight Test, we manufacture from larger pieces of foam that we can buy from the store. So for the plans, we separate it into 2 pieces. The first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to take our wing to the edge of the table and we're going to go ahead and fold it over 180 degrees right on the leading edge. Here's a trailing edge of the bottom surface and there's a leading edge. We simply need to take it over to the table and fold it 180 degrees. Now using a sharp razor blade, we're going to go ahead and cut a 45-degree or greater bevel into both the bottom and the top surface of our leading edge. Now in our crafty kit, we have this amazing razor blade that actually will detent into 1 notch. This gives us the perfect angle to be able to cut our bevel cuts and makes our cuts nice and smooth. The easiest way to cut a bevel cut is to take your plane to the edge of the table and using the razor blade and holding it so the blade is not 90 degrees from the foam, but closer to 60, we're going to keep our razor blade just above the facing paper and we're going to glide it through. Always look ahead of your razor blade to make sure you don't accidentally cut into your hands. So you can see we have our razor blade here. I'm just going to go ahead and gently keep it right above the facing paper. If you accidentally go through the facing paper, don't worry about that because you can easily repair that with a piece of tape. Now I'm going to cut a bevel on the other side and I'm going to just start right where the bottom piece is. I don't have to go all the way to the wingtip. Again, I'm keeping it just above the facing paper. Get right to the edge right there. You want to make sure whenever you do your bevel cut so you can easily lift up the foam past 90 degrees. If it's tight when it's around 45 degrees or even 90 degrees, it's going to be too tight to easily be able to fold over. Now that we have our bevel cuts cut, we're going to go ahead and take our wing and using flat hands and even pressure, we're slowly going to rock down our wing and you're going to see it slowly taking form. We don't want to have to fight the pressure of the wing here. We want to see it kind of naturally go 180 degrees up against it with just a very little amount of curve to the wing. That looks great. This gives us the crush that we need to be able to have the wing fold over properly. Now that we're happy with the way that this folds over, we're going to go ahead and glue on our spars. And to glue on our spars, we're going to take it to the rear trailing edge of the lower surface of our wing. We're going to line up the hash marks where our dihedral goes, and then we're going to glue it in place. I always like to test fit it, then we can flip it over and we can put the glue exactly where we need. Now I'm using our FT300 glue gun with an adjustable temperature select, and I actually have my temperature select on cooler because I don't need the super high temperatures. This helps me work a little bit faster and it also keeps me from burning my fingers. There we go. One down. Always make sure that we have plenty of hot glue available. Again, we're going to do the same process on the other side. We're lining up the dihedral gauge. We'll flip it over. And there we go. At this point, we can start giving our wing its shape. To do this, we're going to go ahead and fold this over just like we did before. And what we want to see is that we can easily bring down this upper level of the wing flat up against the spar while it's against the table. We don't need to worry about the back of our wing as much as the front portion, that we're keeping it flat up against the table like you see here. Once we practice that a couple times to make sure that we can easily press this down, we can come back with a bead of glue, and we're only going to place the bead of glue on the leading edge and also on the top of the spars. We're not going to worry about the back of the wing just yet. So I have plenty of hot glue in my glue gun. My first stripe is going to be going right down the leading edge of the wing, that bevel cut that we cut in. And now we're going to go down our main spars. Now this step is going to call for a little bit of patience because we don't want to release the wing from its pressure until the glue is 100% cured. There we go. So I'm going to go ahead and fold this over 180 degrees, and I'm going to use the flats of my hands, and I'm simply going to press it up against the table, letting my hands extend over, just like you see here. Now, if you want, you can always have a friend help you with holding one side while you hold the other. This gives us a nice even pressure across the whole entire wing, flat against the table, so your wing's not going to bank to the left or to the right. We're going to hold this for about 2 minutes, and then once we remove it, we want to make sure that the wing doesn't spring open for any reason. If it does, immediately bring it back to the table and hold it a little bit longer. Now when we release pressure, what we should see is that this wing is not opening up at all whatsoever, and that the rear portion of our spar is firmly against the rear portion of our wing. Now this is working with a bigger section at one time, but the nice benefit of this is when you can build the whole wing in one piece, not only makes it quicker, but it makes the airfoil more consistent on the left and the right side. This doesn't cause you any unwanted turns as you're flying through the air. Now for the trailing edge of our wing, we want to make sure that we can easily press this up against the bottom of the table and that it doesn't want to spring up with any kind of force. If it does, all you simply need to do is flip it over 180 degrees and kind of rotate this up evenly across the whole entire surface, so that it has no pressure springing open. Once you're happy with that, we're going to clamshell this open 180 degrees. We're going to put a nice healthy bead of glue right down that seam. There we go. As we clamshell that shut, now we can go right back to the table, and we're going to hold this in position for about another 2 minutes and let it fully dry. The important thing now is that we make sure that our trailing edge is flat up against the table and our leading edge is flat up against the table and our spars are flat. Once this is fully dried, you can see that when we lift up our hands, everything is flat up against the table, which means our wing is perfectly straight and true. Now we have a flat wing and we need to put something called dihedral in it. Dihedral is going to give us the stability we need to be able to fly off of 3 channels and also have that natural, gentle, self-righting tendency. To do that, we're going to first have a break in the middle, and that's called dihedral, and then we're going to put 2 additional breaks on the outside, and that's called polyhedral. So polydihedral. Now here we have our dihedral gauge with the big T on it. This stands for trainer. You're going to notice a notch on the top, and that's going to be to establish our dihedral. The lower notches are going to be after we establish our dihedral and glue it in place. That will be for the wingtips when we're establishing the dihedral on these outer edges. The first thing we want to do is we're going to go ahead and open up our wing gently, and you're going to notice that it'll gently crack on the trailing edge, and that will have this nice wide open cavity here. We want to make sure that we can easily lift this up and that we can put our dihedral gauge in here and that this seam is pretty much closed. Once you're happy with that, we can now open it up. Going to put a big healthy bead of glue right on the bottom here, right on the sides, and then go all the way back right to the trailing edge. We want to make sure that we put enough glue to fully adhere this, and we can use our scrap pieces of foam that we have to scrape off any excess that we may have. So here we're just going to go ahead and hold that right there, take my scrap piece of foam, and smear off any excess. We're going to give this about a minute to a minute and a half to fully dry, and if we want, we can even go back with another bead of glue right on the top here and then smear it down again for added strength. You can see after about a minute, minute and a half, when we lift up our hands, that nothing moves. That's exactly what we want to see for every one of our steps as we build an airplane. And also, after about a minute to a minute and a half, and we remove this, you'll see that the wing doesn't fall down. That's also very important. To lock in and get the maximum amount of strength, I'm going to use a piece of packing tape right over the center section, fold it around the front, and fold it around the back. And there we go. Now we're pretty much going to do the same exact process now on the outer wingtips, except this time, instead of using the top notch, we're going to use the center notch. I always like to kind of crack this open. We don't have to go as far this time. So we can open up and expose the intersection that we're going to put our glue in. And then I want to bend this inwards and make sure our dihedral gauge easily holds it up. Once we're happy with that, we can then open this up. We're going to make sure we have plenty of hot glue in our glue gun. I'm going to put the bead of glue right down on the center here. And then right down on the edge of the wing towards the trailing edge. Now I can clip this into the center section of my wing. I'll hold it down. And while I'm holding it down, I use a scrap piece of foam to wipe off the excess. We're going to give this a minute, minute and a half fully dry. Again, making sure that our wing does not move when we remove the bracing, and then we can do the same process on the other side. We're going to open it gently. We're going to crease it in. Make sure our dihedral is easily established and there's not any extra pressure on there. Put an extra bead of glue in here. And finally, put our dihedral down. Didn't put a lot of glue in here, so I'm just going to go over with a real gentle bead. And scrape that off. We're going to wait about a minute to a minute and a half, and then we can move on to our next step. So now you can see after a minute and a half, no deflection, and our wing is just about done. To add a little bit of reinforcement and also the ability to self-align, we're now going to glue this little plate right in between these two etch lines that you see on the bottom of our wing. Now you may have a couple little glue globs on here that you may have to pull off. That's not a big deal at all. Just go ahead and remove those carefully. There we go. And you'll notice a score cut right in the middle here. All we simply need to do is push this up against the workbench and just give it just a little bit of a bend to match the dihedral. Now that we're happy with that, I'm going to place a bead of glue right on both sides here. I can even go right down the middle over that little glue glob. And I'm going to press this down into place. Now this is going to do a couple things for us. This is actually going to notch inside the fuselage and help the wing self-align to the exact center. A common thing with airplanes that have rubber band on wings is that you can rubber band them off to the one side or the other. And a lot of times that'll cause the airplane to be able to drift left or right or bank left and right. This not only aligns it, but it also gives needed reinforcement to the back of the wing so the wing is even more durable. Okay. Our wing is now done, ready to move on to our next step, which is the fuselage. So for our first step of building our fuselage, we're going to go ahead and pop out all the pieces, we'll identify them, and then we'll start building. The tools that we're going to need for this process is going to be our hot glue gun with plenty of glue, a barbecue skewer from our kit, pliers, screwdriver, and our little Allen key for our motor mounts. Now that we have all of our pieces popped out, let's go ahead and go through and identify them. First, we're going to start off with our wood pieces. We have our main motor mount, we have our front nose reinforcement, we have our two side nose cheek reinforcements, we have our main fuselage piece, we have our push rod doubler, we have our front top nose reinforcement, we have our front nose skin, our canopy skin, the main inner body of our fuselage, our rear push rod holder, our tail, and our rudder. Feel free to pause the video at this moment, make sure that all your pieces look just like what you see here, and at that point, we can start weeding out of the foam out of the areas that we need and get this ready to be put together. Now that we have all our pieces popped out, let's go ahead and put our tail and our rudder to the side, and we're going to go ahead and use our razor blade, and we're going to carefully score cut along our score edges and remove the cavities of foam that we need to be able to fold the airplane together. To do this, all we simply need to do is take our razor blade about 3/4 of the way through and lightly glide it over. I always like to dull the tip of my razor blade ever so slightly so I don't accidentally cut through the facing paper on the other side. You can do this by going out to your concrete sidewalk outside, or just use some heavy grit sandpaper and drag the tip of your blade against it. If you accidentally cut through the facing paper, that's no problem at all because you can easily repair it with a small piece of tape. Doing this step really helps release the foam in a nice clean way because you may notice that our new foam has much better adhesion than the older foam. Now that we've score cutted everything that we need, we can simply go back through and remove those channels. The easiest way to peel the foam out is to simply kind of rotate it and then peel it off. If you score cut close enough to the facing paper, you're going to see that this actually pulls off in one nice clean piece. And that's exactly what we want. Sometimes it's easiest just to fold the piece over 180 degrees if you can, and then roll the piece out. And in certain pieces, like the front nose and the top canopy, we're actually going to peel the inside of the foam, just like you see here. You'll notice the outside surface with the paper stays intact, the inside surface gets peeled, that way it's easy to bend. We're going to do that exact same treatment on the front nose as well. To get these inner channels out easily, all you simply need to do is take a barbecue skewer and slightly push down with the dull edge, and the pieces will pop right out. Notice that I'm more kind of sliding it, not really picking at it. Pressing down, pushing it in, and then just kind of rolling it up. All right, let's go ahead and go over the pieces that we weeded out. We have our push rod reinforcement, and we've weeded out the outside channels. We have our main inner body piece, and we removed the channels on both sides so we can do our folds. We have our top canopy piece and our front nose piece, not only weeded out, but also with the paper removed on the inside. We have our top reinforcement for our front nose that's been weeded down the middle. And then we have these open cavities and also the open cavities in the center of our main fuselage piece. Feel free to pause the video at this point, make sure that your pieces look just like what we see here. And at that point, we're going to put our main focus on the main fuselage piece and the center piece. Let's go ahead and put all of our other pieces aside here. We are going to hold on to our front reinforcement and our nose doublers here. The first piece that we're going to be working on is actually going to be the main center section of our fuselage. And to reinforce the front section of our fuselage, you're going to see that we have this piece of wood. This wood is going to line directly over the two side gaps perfectly, and you're going to notice that the hole for the servos is slightly larger than the foam itself, but yet the servo pass-through is going to fit perfectly. We should be able to easily bend up our side plates up against this, and you'll notice that this front T lines up perfectly with it. We're going to put plenty of glue right down over our front nose. This is going to give us a tremendous amount of reinforcement. And then we can line it up once again, making sure that our side pieces are nice and flush. You don't want to go so crazy with the glue that you accidentally put glue inside your cavity. If you do, just take a scrap piece of foam and clear it out. Both sides of this plate should be nice and flush, just like what you see here. At this point, we can do our practice fold, which is ultimately going to be a B fold. But fortunately, since we have this wooden plate down, you can't mess it up because an A fold would actually be taken on the inside, and we can't do that now. This wooden plate's also going to give us the ability to get a perfect 90-degree angle, which we definitely need for when we build our fuselage. All we simply need to do is fold this up 90 degrees, use the table as our friend, and push the side plate firmly against the table. Once we're happy with that, We can come back with a bead of glue, mainly focus on the side plate, just like you see here. And now we can bring this right down and push it against the table. And you can see it's nice and 90 degrees. Same process on the other side. We always want to do a quick test fit. Make sure that we're happy. And then we can firmly push it against the table. Now we can come back with a bead of glue right on the side plate. Bring a little bit up on the wood piece itself. We don't want that to puddle up too great. And there we go. This nose piece is not only going to give us the reinforcement we need, the nose weight we need, but also it's going to protect us in the case of a crash and really transmit the force through the whole entire fuselage. Now that our nose piece is complete, we can go ahead and put this aside and let's put our attention towards the main fuselage piece. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to do C-folds on all the four sides that you see here. To do a C-fold, all we simply need to do is fold this over 180 degrees, make sure that this portion here is flush, and then hold it down into place. You should see that all these pieces can easily be folded over and glued in place. Once we've done our practice fit, I'm actually going to do two at a time. Notice I'm running my finger back and forth to make sure it's flush. We don't want it to be pushed in too far or pushed out too far. There's one side, and there's the other. Same process on the other side now. Let's go ahead and just do our quick test fit. And once we're happy, you can put glue. Notice I'm stopping right from the edge here because that's going to hang over. Now that we have our C-folds done, let's go ahead and glue on our nose doublers. Our nose doublers are going to glue right on the front here and go right over this etch mark that you see here. Easiest way to be able to do this is to simply put a little bit of glue right on down here. And we really want to take our time and make sure that we line this exactly over the etch lines. This is going to be what also holds the nose in place on the front and reinforces it. Same process on the other side. And there we go. Now we're going to take our barbecue skewer and we're going to open up these cavities ever so slightly. We don't want to make this so big that the plane is kind of loose because we're not going to be putting any glue reinforcement. We just want to help it establish the proper amount of crush, be able to fold over and be under a little bit of tension. To do this, I'm going to take the pointy end of my barbecue skewer and I'm going to lightly drag over a couple times down each score line. We can always make this bigger, but we can't make it smaller. So don't go ahead and go too deep, just go about halfway through. And oftentimes what I'll do is once I've punched through, I can use the blunt end of my barbecue skewer and open up just a little more based on what I need. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to gently roll over our fuselage. And just like our wing, you're going to notice I'm not trying to do this in one sweeping push. I'm doing this nice and gentle. And I'm also going to do it on the opposite side. Using nice flat pressure, not pushing down too hard. You can see I'm not putting any wrinkles into the plane. And I'm also not grabbing it and trying to fold it in the air. I'm using the table as my friend and just letting it crush in ever so slightly. And that makes this piece not only incredibly light, but very, very strong. You can see as we look down it that everything is symmetrical, and that's exactly what we want. Now that we're happy with the way everything forms up, let's go ahead and glue in our center fuselage piece. You're going to notice that there's an etch mark that's right along this edge here, and it has a very defined stop point. This is because we don't want to accidentally glue this fuselage piece and glue in our nose. We want the nose to be able to be cut free in later steps. So we're only going to be placing glue from the trailing edge of the rear portion of our fuselage to where this etch mark is. We don't want to make it so it puddles over and accidentally glues over the seam, or you're going to glue your nose into place. So first thing we're going to do, We'll notch this into the front nose piece, and then this should sit down very nicely, just like that, nice and flat. Once we're happy with that and we've established that everything looks good, I'm going to come back with my bead of glue. I'm going to trace this section about 1/4 inch from the inside, put a little glue inside the slots here, and now I can press this into place. You're going to notice just a little bit of friction as we push this nose piece into place, because that actually has a lot of defined precision to keep everything straight and true as we fold over the fuselage. You can see I'm using the table as my friend. I'm holding this nice and flat. There should be no gap along this edge. Now that we have our piece glued down, we're going to go ahead and roll this over and do a test fit. The easiest way to do this is to kind of establish this up in the air and then take it down into our table. We should be able to lay this in and press this nice and flat. Now, if we do this right, this should give us a perfectly true 90-degree angle as we fold it over. And that will tell us that this fuselage is going to be perfectly symmetrical. If you don't have a triangle square, we have an amazing crafty kit that gives you all the tools you need to build all of our airplanes, including some extra accessories like servo testers, battery alarms, and an awesome knife. Now that we've gone through this process and we're happy with the way everything fits, we can kind of pop this apart. Notice the precision from that nose really holds it in place beautifully. And again, we're going to put our glue right down in the center section, stopping about 1/4 inch from that edge line. Put it in these notches. Now we can fold it over. Make sure the top piece goes in there. And the most of my force is not going to be on this top portion here pushing in. It's going to be right where this center piece is. So we're pushing it flat up against the table. It's very easy to be able to come back and make sure that we're 90 degrees on the top wing saddle. We're going to give this a good minute to a minute and a half to fully dry, and we can move on to our next step. At this point, you can see when we lift this up here that both pieces are parallel to each other and that the curve on the bottom is nice and symmetrical. That's exactly what we want. Now that we have our main fuselage piece done, let's go ahead and put our attention towards the push rods. To keep our rear push rods from bending, they're actually going to be inset on the bottom of the rear fuselage piece. That means we're going to want to go ahead and open up these channels here so the push rods can easily glide back and forth through it. And to keep them from bowing out of their slots, this little piece of foam is going to glue down right on top of it, and that's going to keep them from being able to bow on the inside of the fuselage. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to take my barbecue skewer and I'm going to carefully drag all the way to the edge of the paper and open this up. Do this over a couple swipes here so you don't bunch up the foam inside this cavity. At the end of the day, we want this to glide nice and free, and any kind of pilled up foam is going to cause drag. So notice I'm just kind of opening it up there. And I also like to go on the top here and open up these channels. Next, we're going to grab our 2 push rods. And you're going to notice that we have a Z-bend on one side and we have no Z-bend on the other side. You're going to see the side with the notch right here. This side of the notch is going to be the side that we have our Z-bend passing through. That ultimately will go to the servos. So the easiest thing to do is to pass it through one side, pass it through the other side, and at that point, we can take our barbecue skewer and press it down in. You should be able to easily, with very little resistance at all, move your push rod back and forth. If it feels like it's tight at all, you can go ahead and just take your barbecue skewer over a couple more times, opening up that channel until it's nice and free. Same process on the other side. Again, the Z-bend's going to go towards the side with the notch. Press it through one side, and then press it through the other side. Once we press that in, we can make sure that it easily flows back and forth, and it does. Now, we don't want to glue this in and have this be able to pop out in flight because we'll lose control. To do this, to reinforce this, we're simply going to glue with a small bead of glue this plate, and that's going to keep it from popping out of the slot. I don't need to put glue all over this. All I need to do is put glue right down the center, about 1/4 inch in from the edges. This is going to keep any amount of glue from seeping into that slot but it's still going to keep this piece of foam right over where we need it and keep these pieces captured. Now we can take this to our fuselage and do a quick test fit. All we need to do is bring this rear piece of the top fuselage in till it rests up against the center plate. And we're going to push the side fuselage pieces together and use the table as our friend to basically keep everything square and true as it dries. Once we practice this move and we're comfortable with it, we can then go ahead and remove it. And we're going to apply a bead of glue right down each side flap. I'm going to put a little glue on this doubler. We don't want to put too much towards the rear of the fuselage because that's extra weight that we don't need. And then I like to kind of just put a little dab of glue on both sides where it's going to be hitting that one little shelf inside the fuselage. Now we can take it in once again. We'll bring it all the way forward. We'll rest it down. And it's not until we bring it up against the table that I'm going to kind of push in and push down. There we go. Notice I'm pushing in and I'm pushing down. I'm squeezing the fuselage sides and I'm letting the flat of the table give me a nice straight edge on the top of the fuselage. All right, after about a minute to minute and a half, you're gonna see that this piece has suddenly gotten incredibly strong, has a nice finished look, and our push rods are beautifully guided through. Let's go ahead and put our attention now towards the front nose of our fuselage here. For this step, we're gonna need our two pieces that we peeled the paper from and also remove the cavities of foam from. The first thing we're going to do is establish a nice curve, and the easiest way to do that is to bring this up against the edge of the table and slowly rotate it back and forth. I like to do this a couple times, and after we do that, you can see how easy it is to be able to form it and do any kind of fine tuning with your hands. The important thing is we don't want any wrinkles if we don't have to. Same process on the other side here. Notice that we have a little tiny score cut here. That's going to be where we can actually open up this one piece to make a second channel. And once we're happy with that, we can do any kind of fine tuning with our hands. On both these pieces, we have a cavity cut out to allow us to be able to fold over our piece of foam 90 degrees. We're going to go ahead and practice that fold. You can see we just take the flap down to the table, rotate it up 90 degrees, and then we'll lock it down with a bead of glue. Same process on the other side. Again, we're going to fold this down 90 degrees, make sure everything fits nice. Bead of glue, back down to the table and hold it. Now that we have both of our pieces curled, we're going to first start with our canopy and do a test fit before we glue anything down. The piece that we just folded over is going to rest against the back of our wing doubling plate. And if we did all this correctly, what you're going to notice here is this piece will curve down and this bottom tab will actually recess down inside the nose. That's exactly what we want. Make sure that we can easily put this piece into place without having to kind of hold it too much. You want to form this with your hands in a way where it naturally takes the exact shape of the front piece. All right, now it looks good. You can see we don't have to force anything. Now that we're happy with it, I'm going to place a healthy bead of glue right on the side of each flap. I can even put a little drop on our tab. Now I just like to open up the fuselage ever so slightly. We have plenty of time to work with this. The important thing is that the back of our canopy is flush with the front leading edge of our wing. And at that point, we can go ahead and go down to the table, and I'm kind of pinching in on the fuselage to make sure that it doesn't spread out. I'll rotate back and rotate forward. Rotate back and rotate forward. All this time I'm pushing my fuselage sides in very gently just to make sure I have the strongest glue joint possible and everything stays parallel. We're going to do this for about 30 seconds to a minute until it's fully dry, and then we're going to repeat pretty much the exact same process on the front nose. All right, you can see we have a beautiful canopy alignment here. It's nice and flush, there's no wrinkles, exactly what we want. Now to prep the front nose piece, we're going to go ahead and kind of do a bevel cut on the very bottom portion where it starts to curve in a little bit. And this is to be able to allow us to put the nose piece on a little bit easier. It doesn't have to be perfect or even pretty. All we're simply doing is we're making it go from an angled piece of foam to a flat piece of foam. Sometimes I use just a little saw motion if I can't get a bevel or an angle of my blade that I like. And that cuts very nicely. There we go. We can always trim this a little bit more as we put the nose piece down and make sure it fits properly, but it's a lot easier to do it right now. You're gonna see that we have a cut or a score cut in our foam. This allows us to glue one side first and then the second side second. First piece we wanna do a test fit on is gonna be the top portion of our nose. You'll notice that this top flap pushes up against the bottom portion of the canopy and that this rolls around very nicely. Once we're happy with this and we don't have to force anything into shape, we're gonna do the exact same process that we just did. We're gonna place a bead of glue on each side. I like to put a little drop on each side. I'm even gonna put a little bit of glue where it meets up with the canopy. Notice we don't have to rush for anything, taking our time. Lay this down, push in just a little bit, and just like before, down to the table, rotate up all the way to the score cut, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, back down to the table, rotate back up. This rocking motion just kind of helps everything seat in place very nicely. That looks wonderful. Now we have this bottom section that we can make sure that kind of crushes into place. And I don't want to crush it all the way into place because then I'm gonna have to dig it out and I could damage this nose. I'm just gonna go ahead and push it down enough to make sure that I'm happy with the fit. And if I have to do any kind of trim work, I can easily do so. Now for this glue, we're not gonna start with the glue on the side of each piece, but I'm actually gonna drip some glue on both sides so as I push this piece in, it doesn't squeeze out. Later on, I can come back with a small bead of glue on both sides, and I'm going to use a metal ruler to be able to form the hot glue to make a really smooth, strong surface. So all I need to do now that I'm happy with the fit, I'm going to put a bead of glue on the bottom, and I'm going to focus my glue on the inside of this panel all the way around. This is just more to keep it nice and neat. Still putting the glue exactly where we want it. And now I'm going to use a table as my friend. I'm gonna rotate this down, and right when I get to the last little part, I'm gonna just give a little bit of a rocking motion, and you're gonna see that that foam is gonna crush in beautifully and make a beautiful nose. Now I can go back and forth. One more time. And there we go. You're gonna see a little bit of paper hanging over the edge. And this is where we can go into our crafty kit and grab our metal ruler. And a really cool trick is that whenever you take hot glue and a metal ruler together, it dries the glue incredibly fast, and it also doesn't adhere to your metal ruler. So I'm just gonna open this up a little bit. This is just a trick and tip. It's not something you have to do. You can reinforce with tape if you want. Put a very thin bead of glue right on the bottom. I'm gonna take my steel ruler. I'm gonna fold this up. I'm gonna fold that flat up against the piece of foam. And after about 5-6 seconds, I got this beautiful, smooth, sealed edge. Because this is gonna be landing against the ground so many times, I want this to be strong and sealed so it can take a lot of beatings. Same process now on the other side. Again, this is just kind of a tip and trick. You don't have to master this. You can take a piece of tape and slap it right over the top if you wanna just get it done dirty and quick. Again, taking my metal ruler right over here, letting the glue squeeze out, knowing it's only gonna stick to the foam and not the metal ruler, and boom, we're done. We're gonna hold on to this metal ruler because our next step is to cut the nose free. You're gonna notice that we have some cut-through marks all the way around our fuselage. The first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna take our razor blade, and we're not gonna start with where the cut-through marks are, because if we cut through that area, we're gonna cut off our nose. We only wanna put our razor blade from one point of the cut mark to the other. This is gonna keep our nose safe, and we're not gonna cut through anything we don't want to. So I'm going to line that up perfectly right over the cut marks. I'm going to press it down. I never try to cut through anything once, even if I could. There's one cut, and there's two cuts. If at any point you ever have to kind of go through without the ruler once you establish it, feel free to do so. I'm going to do the other side now. Again, I'm going to start and stop right where the cut lines end, not cutting through the portion of the fuselage. There's one cut. And there's two cuts. And we'll just verify that it's all the way through, and it is. I don't really need a ruler for this next step. I'm just going to go ahead and rock my blade from one side to the other. And there's one side. To the other. And our last cut's going to be on the very top here. Just going to give myself a little indent on both sides, tell me exactly where I want to be. Boom. There we go. Now you're going to notice here, once we make our cuts, the nose and the body will easily separate. When it comes time to put this back together, you're also going to notice that once you find that front section that has the wood alignment, it easily lines up. But we can still move our fuselage and our nose separately from each other. To fix that problem, we're going to go ahead and take this doubler and we're going to fold it in half and glue it together, and then that is going to insert right here. Let's go ahead and put a little bit of glue down. Fold it over on our table. This is just a basic C-fold. It's always a safe bet if you ever see something double the width of the foam, it's most likely going to be a C-fold. There we go. And now we can do a quick test fit. You're going to see that we have a back plate and a top plate, so we're going to put glue on both those sections. Going to do a stripe down the top here and a stripe on the bottom. Hold that in place, and then we can let it dry. Now this barbecue skewer that we've been using a lot, we are now going to use to be able to attach our front nose. We're going to slide this back in, find our front nose dowel, and you're going to see that that top plate now keeps us from sliding down, and that's exactly what we want. On the side of our nose here, you're going to see a little tiny hole. I'm going to go ahead and push these two pieces together, nice and flush, and I'm going to poke a hole right on through. Now I'm going to flip it over and do the same process on the other side. Again, nice and flush. And poke a hole right on through. From this point, I should be able to guide my pin from one side to the other with no resistance. I don't want this to stick out too far because we're not putting any rubber bands on it. So typically, I'll only have it sticking about 1/8 of an inch on one side because that's enough to be able to grab this and pull this. So once I mark this with my hand, I can take it to the table, use a razor blade, roll back and forth, and crack it. And there we go. You can see that this is going to hold the nose perfectly. It's not going to be able to shift it anyway, but we can always easily remove it to replace our battery or put FPV gear on it. Now while we have our barbecue skewer here, let's go ahead and finish off our wing hold downs. Same process as before. We always kind of like to poke a hole on both sides before passing it through. This just helps us make it even and nice to be able to find the other side. In this case, we're going to want to leave at least 3/8 of an inch to almost 1/2 an inch on both sides. We want plenty of room for the rubber bands to be able to grip. There's one. Now with the back one, we're going to be going through 2 layers of foam on this, so a little bit of a twist in motion is good. Sometimes we got to punch through some hot glue. This one has a doubler because it's not only holding the rear of the wing down, but it's also holding down the motor. Almost there. And there we go. We'll pass that through the other side. There we go. And once we've made our mark, we're going to cut one last time. And there we are. Now that we have everything assembled that you see here, let's go ahead and put our attention towards our tail. To prep our tail, we're going to first go ahead and open up our hinge lines 180 degrees, and we're going to cut a bevel cut on the movable control surface. So in this case, we're going to be putting our single bevel cut around the rudder here, and for the elevator, we're going to put it on the elevator side, not the stabilizer side. To do our bevel cuts, again, we're going to go back to our hobby knife. We're going to go right down to the table, and keeping the edge of our razor blade just ahead or above the facing paper, we're going to slice through about 45 degrees. Now, if your bevel cut has any kind of resistance and it's fighting you too much, you can easily go back and shave off a little bit more, or even use a piece of sandpaper to be able to get closer to that facing paper. At the end of the day, you don't want to have any resistance between the facing paper, and you want to easily be able to move it down and up. Same process on the rudder. Perfect. Now by itself, this hinge line will last a little longer, but after a lot of flights and a lot of abuse, and maybe a couple cartwheels or two, this hinge line could start fatiguing. To make this stronger, we're going to take a bead of glue, and we're going to put the nozzle right down, right where the facing paper meets the foam. And as soon as I put it down, I'm going to take a scrap piece of foam, and I'm going to scrape it off. This is not meant to be built up in any way. What we're doing is we're simply squeezing the hot glue down into the facing paper and the foam and marrying them together. A simple trick to take away the tackiness: look at the tip of your finger, rub it right over the cooled hot glue, and at that point, you should have no resistance and a very strong joint. If you feel any resistance for any reason, maybe you have some glue globs in here, take your razor blade and shave off any glue that may be obstructing your movement. We want to easily be able to move this with no resistance. Same process on the other side. Thin bead of glue, and with our scrap piece of foam, we're pretty much going to wipe off everything that we just put down, just pushing it into the pores of the foam and the facing paper. Finally, just lick the tip of your finger, rub it right over the hot glue. Now to glue on our elevator, we're going to line up the two notches that we have on the top of our fuselage with our elevator. And I really like to use the table as my friend to be able to push this down and keep it nice and flat so everything stays perpendicular. So you can see that we have our two tabs down, everything's lining up beautifully. At this point, I can come back with a bead of glue right over the flaps. Notice I'm not putting on the upper part of the tab because we don't want to glue it to our table. And with our hinge line down, I'm going to just lift up on the push rods, go up all the way in, find my tabs, and then we're going to hold this flat up against the table. Now you're going to notice as we sight down our fuselage, everything is either vertical or perpendicular to itself, and that's perfect. Let's go ahead and install our rudder here. And for this step, it's really handy to be able to have a triangle square, just like you see here. We're just going to do a quick test fit. Notice that the front notch fits in the front of the fuselage, and the rear notch fits in the top of the stabilizer. Once we're happy with the fit, come right back down. There we go. And then I'm just going to take my triangle square, and we're going to hold that right over. Before this finally dries, I always like to do a quick sight to make sure that the fin is parallel with the sides of the fuselage. Now pretty much the airframe for this airplane is now done. Let's go ahead and put our attention now towards the controls, mainly the servos, the electronics, and everything it's going to need to be able to fly. Now for this model, we're using our Power Pack A. The really cool thing about the Power Pack A is it can be a great entry power pack, but also it can go to many other models that are more advanced, like our Aero, our FT22, and so many more. This means that one set of electronics can basically go into 10, 15 different airframes. So when you're done with the Explorer, you can take those electronics out and put it into a new airplane. The servos that we're going to want for this are going to be our little FT5 grams that we're going to see inside here. And with our servos, we have a couple different servo arm options. The servo arm that we're going to actually choose is going to be the smallest little T servo that you see right here. We're going to go ahead and cut 3 of the arms off, but we want to preserve the shortest arm. So we have 2 short arms and 2 longer arms. This plane does not need much throw to be able to fly, so we're just going to go ahead and cut off the 3 arms that we don't need. These servos do come pre-centered, so what we're going to do is we're going to carefully go ahead and find the center notch and press it down into place. We can power this on before we lock down our linkage stoppers, which means that as long as we put this down centered, we should be okay. If for any reason that you've moved the servo or played with the servos anyway and moved them, go ahead and center your servos before this step. We have a really good video on showing you exactly how to do that we can link down below. I'm picking the shortest screw that we have. You can see that we have 3 long ones and 2 short ones. I'm going to pick one of the 2 short ones, and I'm going to go ahead and reinforce the servo arm as I screw this down. This is going to keep me from snapping any gears. Just gentle, don't have to drive in too hard, and there we go. The other servo arm is going to be facing the opposite direction. Again, we're going to locate our smallest T servo arm. We have the 2 shorts, the 2 longs. We're going to preserve one of the shorts. 1, 2, 3. And for this servo arm, we're going to go the opposite direction, just like that. Again, we're going to find our shortest screw. If you put a long screw in there, it will strip out and damage and destroy the servo. You always want to put your servo screws down, because if you neglect this step and your servo arm pops out, you won't have any control. Now that we have our 2 servos assembled, let's go ahead and remove the front nose of our Explorer here. And you're going to see that we have 2 Z-bends sticking out. I want these to be as low as possible to the actual fuselage. So for that reason, I'm going to go ahead and have my Z-bend pointing up. And all I simply need to do is line it up with the hole. If it rotates ever so slightly, it's not a big deal, because we're going to turn this on and center everything up before we lock it down. There's 1. And here's 2. Now you can see that I have my 2 servos on my push rods here. I'm going to go and slide them back one at a time, and I'm simply just going to go ahead and press them down into the hole right on the front fuselage. Just grab one servo at a time, go back to the servo hole, and press it down into place. And then the other one, and then press it down into place. Now these actually fit together beautifully in place, but all I simply need to do is gently lift up on my servos on both sides, and I can take my hot glue gun down inside here and drip a couple drops on the back and a couple drops in the front, and then push it down. So I'm just going to kind of angle this up. I'm just going to drop a couple little drops on the back there, and a drop underneath each side on the front. Now I can press these down into place, and we're good to go. I actually like my leads to go through the bottom, and I'm going to have my receiver on the bottom, so I'm just simply going to tuck both of my leads right through my servo pass-through to the bottom. This is a really great way to be able to route our wires nice and neat, make it look really clean, and I can always pass this up through to the top later if I want to be able to go onto our Aura board, if we choose to install it. Now that we have both of our servos installed, our push rods installed, we can put our attention towards our back elevator. Again, these principles that we're learning through this model will carry over through all the additional models that you build in the future. So learning how to do this now is really beneficial because it kind of sets you free to build a lot of different models with no intimidation. In our kit, you're going to actually see that we have 4 of our standard swappable control horns. These are a little bit bigger because we want a little bit less throw on this trainer, and we also have in our power pack our linkage stoppers. Let's go ahead and prepare our control horns and our linkage stoppers now, and then we can install them on the airplane. We always try to give you extras beyond what you need, so these linkage stoppers are like gold. They're perfectly sized to our control horns, and they work fantastic. We're going to go to the outermost hole on our control horn. So here's the innermost hole, closest to our hinge line, next one, and then the outermost. I always like to use the table as my friend as I push this down through. We're going to gently press that through. Now I can take my little hard plastic keeper on the back and I can press that into place. There we go. And then I can take this down to the table and press it the rest of the way in. Then finally, we're going to take our little tiny grub screw that's going to hold our push rod in place and just start it by a couple threads. We're going to install our rudder control horn now, and it's actually going to pass through the same direction as our elevator. So again, we're going to go ahead and start this, take it down to the table, put our keeper on the back. There we go. And then finally our grub screw. One thing that I always try to keep tabs on is my linkage stoppers. I went from never using them to absolutely loving these ones because we don't have to put in Loctite or screw on the back end, and they work fantastic. Now you can see that our push rods are actually a lot longer than what we really need. To cut these to the perfect length, if you notice that right where the slot of our control horn starts, we're going to go ahead and match up our control push rod with that edge, and then we can cut that free. There's one. And again, we're going to line that up with our slot there. That gives us about a 1/4 of an inch slop. We can always trim a little bit lower if we need to. And now we can slide this through. And press our control horn down into place right over the slot. We always want to make sure that the hole of our control horn is directly over our hinge line. This gives us even deflection both ways. And same process on our rudder here. There we go. And again, we're just making sure that our control horn is lined up directly with our hinge line, and that's fantastic. Now we're not going to do any additional steps here until we power on our system for the first time. We make sure our servos are centered up, our trims are centered up, and at that point, we can lock down our control surfaces. So let's go ahead and finish off our electronics on the front side here, because then we can go ahead and activate everything and get it running. Now one of my favorite features on this airplane is the fact that we really don't have to build a complicated firewall. All we simply have is a simple piece of wood that's going to hold our motor, and that's easily removable in case we ever want to do anything like slope soaring, gliding, glider tows, or teach someone how to fly without a motor. And you're going to notice that included in our motor are these extra screws here. We're only going to need 2 of the 5 screws that you see, and we can pick either side. We want to make sure that the orientation of the motor is such where the actual leads will pass through the little tiny hole that you see on the bottom. Once we have this lined up, we can simply tighten our screws down. And again, you're going to notice on our Power Pack A, we have 2 screws that are closer in together and 2 screws that are farther apart. These screws are going to go to the farther apart screws. At this point, our motor is fastened. We're ready to go ahead and install it into our airplane. Now to make this install easy, I'm just going to go ahead and pinch our 2 little tabs that you see here so they easily glide through our firewall. And to install this, all we simply need to do is line up the bottom notch, and with a little bit of pressure, our tabs are going to push into place. And you can see that's going to hold beautifully. This basically keeps the fuselage from crushing in, and this, as it gives you thrust, is going to counter lever off the bottom of the fuselage and make an amazingly strong joint. Cool. And to fasten the motor down, all we simply need to do is we're just going to go around one time and then right on back. And at that point, the motor is going to go nowhere until we decide to take it off. Next, we're going to go ahead and take our speed control and we're going to open it up. If you buy our Power Pack A, you not only get a lifetime warranty when you use the matched electronics, but you also get incredible efficiency and a very smooth control. Next, we're going to go ahead and plug in all 3 leads of our bullets to our ESC. Now, it doesn't matter which order we plug this in because if the motor runs backwards, we just need to switch any 2 of the 3 leads on the motor to make it run the other direction. I'm going to go ahead and guide this down through, and I'm going to go ahead and push my ESC lead right to the bottom. For now, I'm going to let everything dangle until we make sure that our motor's running in the right direction, and at that point, we can go ahead and reverse it, and then we can glue the ESC in place so it gets plenty of airflow, and it also doesn't get in the way of our servos. Now, depending on what electronics you choose to use, or if you got one of our Get Started kits, you may see either our R84 or an R88 receiver. The R84 has a little bit of a special pin order, so I'm going to go ahead and focus on that, and the R88 is a little bit easier to understand. For this version, we're going to go ahead and put this together without stabilization, but if you choose to get started with stabilization option with the Aura board, it is an incredible experience, especially if you're in schools. It just simply flies and anyone can fly it. You're going to notice on the R84 that we have pins 1 and 2, 1 being on the top, 2 being on the bottom, pin 3, and pin 4. You're also going to notice that the grounds are actually gathered together. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to locate our ESC, and that's going to go into port number 3. Port number 3 is going to be located on the top, and the ground's going to be on the inside. There we go. Our rudder is going to go into port number 1. Again, our ground's going to be towards the center. So ground, 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 ground. And then finally, our elevator is going to go into port number 2, again with the ground being the center. So here's port number 1. Directly underneath is port number 2. The reason I do this end pin design is because a lot of these mini models, even though this is a full range receiver, have very limited space. This is a really great, lightweight, compact setup that is incredibly powerful, and again, full range with diversity. At this point, all of our connections are made and we're ready to power this on and bind it for the first time if you haven't done so already. For this process, I'm going to be using our new FT Pocket radio that comes with our new Get Started kits.
Welcome to HTX. Throttle active, low rate.
You can see that this is pre-configured with many different models. If you haven't already selected it, we want to select FT Trainer. The way that we select different models, especially from our preloaded models, is we're going to hit the model button one time, and at that point, it's going to give us the model select menu. I can go up and down, and you're going to see all the different FT airplanes that we have preloaded. Now, if you're a beginner pilot and you want the lower rates and a more gentle flight experience, I'd strongly recommend selecting FT Trainer. This is also going to give us a slight rudder mix, so when you're flying rudder and aileron together, it's even more gentle. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight FT Trainer. I'm going to hit Select Model.
Throttle active, low rate.
And at that point, I can hit the return button in the upper left-hand corner and back out of it. Now that we're on the FT Trainer model, I backed out to the main screen, and then we're going to take you through the bind process just to show you from the very beginning. To be prepared for binding mode, all we simply need to do is hit the model button one time. We're going to use the page button over one time, and you'll see we have a setup screen. At this point, we can use our scrolly ball, and we can scroll all the way down. And a couple things I want to point out here is in our internal RF, we're going to be on mode multi. We should be on FR Sky X, and we should be on subtype D16. If it's not that way, or maybe it's been changed in the past, all you simply need to do is highlight it and scroll back and forth until you see that. Make sure again our subtype is on D16, and at that point we're going to scroll down to where we say bind. We're going to hit it one time, and then you have one final page saying telemetry on, off, or different channel options. We want to make sure we're sitting and resting right on this telemetry on, and at that point we can now put our receiver in bind mode and then come back and activate this. The way that we're going to be putting our R84 receiver, and for that matter our R88 receiver in bind mode, is you're going to see a bind button on both of them. On the R84, it's this top little button right here. I'm simply going to hold this down, and while holding it down, I'm going to make connection with my battery. Sometimes you got to kind of position it in your hands to make this easy. So I'm holding down on my button, and I'm powering this on. Now when I release this, you're going to see multiple flashes. Right now we see 2 flashes, and then we're going to see 3 flashes, and then it's going to come back around, and it's just a moment to 1 flash. For D16 mode, we want to bind it at the point when it's flashing 2 times. This is going to be when it's binding to D16 mode. So now I'm just going to wait and take my time. I got my controller here. I'm on telemetry on. And there we go. At the point that it's flashing 2 times and I hit the bind button, you can see I'm getting a rapid flash, and it is now bound. Give it a couple more seconds here, and there we go. Now at this point, I can hit return back all the way out, and what we should see on our transmitter is we should see some bars indicating that we have telemetry. Now because we have telemetry back and forth, which means the transmitter's talking to the receiver and the receiver's also talking to the transmitter, if we get this too close, there's sometimes a chance where it'll lose connection, just like that. But you'll notice that when we're flying and we move this away, we're okay. For this reason, we want to make sure that we always have our failsafe turned on and that we don't have any throttle control. Just keep in mind when you go ahead and power this on, you should be at the flying field ready to launch this. You don't want to be walking around or working around your table and then walking out to your flying site. Now at this point, all of my trims are centered, my throttle's down, and you can see that I have rudder control and I have elevator control. I'm going to go ahead and put this to the side. I'm going to go ahead and neutralize both my controls. I can use a barbecue skewer. I can use this piece of plastic right here. All I want to do is simply hold it flat and screw it into place. Once I got it started, I can reinforce it and kind of hold this area a little bit stronger so I'm not putting any unnecessary pressure on the control surface. And we're going to make sure that's nice and tight. Same process on the elevator. Whether it's a barbecue skewer or a paint stick, doesn't really matter. We just want to hold this nice and flat. And we're going to lock it down. I always just kind of get it started, and then I can support behind it so I'm not bending the control horn. And there we go. Now that we have our controls locked down, we're going to go ahead and check the direction of our controls. When I pull back on my elevator stick, I should see the elevator go up. If I don't see that, I need to reverse it. And there you can see our elevator goes down. So that control is going to need to be reversed. Now when I push my stick to the right, I should see my rudder deflect to the right. And that is correct. So right, right. The only control I need to reverse in this case is going to be my elevator.
Telemetry lost. Telemetry recovered.
Let's go ahead and do that right now. To reverse any of our control surfaces, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to press the model button 1 time. At that point, we've entered into our model mode. We can use the page over button till we see the word output. There we go. Now we can use our rolly ball, understanding that port number 1 is our aileron, port number 2 is our elevator, port number 3 is our throttle, port number 4 is our rudder, and then from that point on, those switches can be assigned. So I'm going to go ahead and go to port number 2, channel 2 in other words. I'm going to click it once, I'm going to select edit, click it again, and from this point now, I can go down to where I see the word direction. And you're going to see there's 3 dashed lines on this one. All I simply need to do is click it 1 time, and you'll see the word INV, which stands for invert. That means now we've mixed, or we've actually reversed the direction. And you can see when I pull back on my elevator now moves up. It's always important that every time when we build a model, we always check the direction and we reverse as necessary before we do this. Even if it's one of our power packs and maybe one power pack matches up perfectly, sometimes from manufacturing, servo directions can change. Cool. At this point now, I can go ahead and hit return, go out of my menu, and you can see that if you're using our FT radio here, I've already programmed in different dual rates. The first rate, which is all the way forward, is low rate. The second one is middle rate.
Medium rate.
And then the upper one towards us
High rate.
is high rate. And if you look at our elevator, we have high rate, medium rate,
low rate.
and low rate. Same for our rudder, low rate, medium rate,
high rate,
and high rate.
low rate.
All of our pre-programmed models come with preset dual rates that will really be the most friendly for that model within that bracket. So in other words, we flew a bunch of FT trainers and we identified rates and throws that'll give you the best experience. When you're flying wings, same thing. When you're flying sport planes or maybe a quad, same thing. We also programmed in for safety, a fail-safe. So in other words, by default, I can't turn my motor on and off, but when I hit this button here on the left,
Throttle active.
I can now activate this. This is whether you're a beginner or an advanced pilot or you're in the classroom and you're building and flying for the first time. We want you to have the best features already programmed and also have it be safe. Now that we have our controls moving the right way, let's go ahead and check the rotation of our prop. Now we're going to put our prop on at the very last step here before we go out and made this for its first flight. You're going to see that on our prop we have numbers on that say 6 times 4.5. Those numbers always point towards the nose whether the motor's on the front or on the back. So for this case, we're going to want the prop to be on the back like you see here. We're also going to notice that we want the prop to produce thrust, which means in this case, if you're facing towards it, it's going to be counterclockwise. When we give this a little bit of throttle, it's spinning the opposite direction. So all we simply need to do is we need to go ahead, pick any two of these wire leads and swap them out. So I just unplug this one, I'm going to take it to the one I just unplugged previously, and now I'm going to plug this in together. And now you can see that we're spinning counterclockwise, so when we install our prop with the numbers pointing forwards, it's going to produce thrust for us. At this point, we can go ahead and we can take a little drop of hot glue. I'm going to put this right on top here. And I'm not going to pull these connections taut, but what I want to do is I just want to put it on the very side so it's easily accessible, just like you see here. Now with all of our controls moving in the right direction, let's go ahead and dress up our wiring. We can power off our transmitter by holding it down for 5 seconds on the power button. Now to get the best range on this, I'm going to go ahead and tuck my wire leads back in the back. I don't want anything going too far back here because if I do that, I have the risk of having to put more nose weight than I really need to in the front. There we go. I also like to take one of my wire leads and push them through my servo hole so it's kind of pointing vertical. This is going to give us the best diversity for the longest range possible. And I can just let that kind of flop in the back here. And then my other wire lead, I can tuck in the back as well. This puts the receiver easily accessible, but at the same time, it gives us all this extra real estate to be able to mount other items like FPV. Now that we're happy with the direction of our prop and our batteries unplugged, we can go ahead and fasten that down. You're going to notice that we have a prop washer, a lock nut, and also a locking spinner nut. Because this is a pusher, we're going to go ahead and use our lock nut and the prop washer. Definitely recommend holding onto our spinner nut because frankly, they're awesome. Anytime we have a pusher configuration, I highly recommend using a lock nut if possible, or using a reverse prop so the nut's always being tightened in case of an impact. There we go, we'll just tighten down just a little bit more. There we go. Now that we have our electronics working in the right direction, we're ready to install our battery, establish center of gravity, and also this extra little nose weight. Now, this is specifically designed to have a very gentle, easy flying experience on something as small as our 2-cell 800 milliamp battery. The only downside is there's not enough weight to be able to give it the ability to balance properly. So for that reason, in our kit, we included a little tiny 1 ounce weight that you see here. And that weight is actually going to be stuck right down, just like what you see right here. This is going to give us the ability, whether you're flying a 2-cell battery or later on flying an 853 cell or even FPV gear, to be able to move your battery back and forth and have full resolution of control over your center of gravity. You can either use a sticky back, or in my case, sometimes I like to just put a little bit of glue down and stick it into place. Now that that's stuck down, I'm going to go ahead and take the Velcro that's included. You can see I already cut this down in size. We don't need the full length. And on this battery, I have fuzzy. So on my fuselage, I'm going to do prickly. Where I'm going to be placing this is going to be about 1 inch back from where the foam meets the wood. Keeping in mind that basically we have a curve here. I can move this all the way up to the front, or for other applications, I can move this further back. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and move it all the way to the front here, and now I can slide this on. And we're going to pin this in. On the bottom of our wings, you're going to see 2 dots. These dots are where the approximate center of gravity is. Now the cool thing is you can go just on one side or just on the other and have a really great flight experience, but we strongly recommend that you use this as a reference to be able to get this to balance just level or slightly nose down. To attach the wing, you're going to notice that it simply fits down beautifully, and that center little section that we have will key in and keep your wing nice and centered. It also fits nice and flush to the very bottom, which means we got our wing exactly formed the way we want to. All we need to do now is use a couple rubber bands crisscrossed and fasten it down. There we go. Now you can fly this in as little as 2 rubber bands on the wing and have a nice bendy experience. So if maybe you crash a lot and you want the wing to be able to kind of bend loose, or if you're flying in windier conditions or flying faster on a 3-cell, we do give you 5 rubber bands total to be able to fasten the wing down. Just avoid doubling this up where you crush the wing down and change the shape of it. Now you can see that when I go to these 2 dots with the 2-cell battery all the way in the front, this balances off perfectly level, if not slightly nose down. We are now ready to take this out for its very first maiden flight, and the airplane's done. We'll see you out at the flying field. All right, guys, it is time to fly here. It is a dead calm day, and that's exactly what we want for our very first flight. Especially if you're new to the hobby, wait the time to get the best weather. Now, anytime that you do fly, there's most likely going to be just a little bit of wind. Always make sure you launch into the wind, and in this case, we're going to launch with about a 5-degree upward angle. Now, we've already installed our battery. We've already checked to make sure that our center of gravity is good, and we've also checked our throws, right, left, up, and down. And this is a 3-channel wing, which means we're going to have no aileron control. The first thing we're going to do, and if you're flying off of our new FT Pocket radio here, we're going to make sure that we're in low rates.
High rate, low rate.
And we're also going to disarm our throttle cut.
Throttle active.
There it is. Okay, a lot of people want to be able to launch this at full throttle. You don't need to. Go about 3/4 throttle. We're going to launch it directly into the wind, about 5 degrees up. Let's go ahead and do that right now. Guys, and there it is. I'm yet to even touch the controls, and it is flying beautifully. I'm going to give it about a 1/4 inch input to the right, and you can see whenever I take my hands off the controls, it takes a little while, but it'll naturally kind of glide back right to the middle here. And we're going to go gently to the left. Right now I'm at half throttle and I'm flying a 2-cell battery. This is going to give us about 8 to 10 minutes of flight time, and you can see how incredibly slow it is. Most of the time you're flying, you're going to be flying right around half throttle, maybe a little bit less. It's incredibly slow. Now this plane is capable of actually catching a thermal because of its light weight. I'm just going to turn to the right. Anytime you want to do sharper turns, feed a little bit of back pressure on your elevator to maintain altitude. And also be aware, when you go to full throttle, you're going to have a slight pitch down, and then you're going to notice it pitching up. Now with the 2-cell here, it's actually going to establish a beautiful climb angle, about 45 degrees, and you will climb incredibly quickly. Now a lot of times we go to the big indoor arenas. This would be fantastic at an indoor football arena, even a huge large open gymnasium, but make sure you're very comfortable flying outside on calm days before you ever try that. All right, let's go and do a couple basic aerobatics. Go to full throttle, full back on the sticks, chop it on the top, and there we go. You can practice your figure eights, your S turns where you kind of do lazy wing overs. And again, this is with no aura, no stabilization, just simply a motor glider. All right, let's go ahead and bring it in for a landing. I think this is going to be the choice airplane that we're going to use when we redo our beginner series because it has a protected prop, it's such an iconic model, and it's incredibly easy to fly. All right, I'm just going to step to the side here. And there we go. Friends, I want to thank you for being part of the Flight Test family. Thank you so much for building along with us. This plane is truly a plane that you can grow with. Our next flight is actually going to be flying with the sport wing, and that's after the build video. So make sure you check out that build video. Also, it's a fantastic candidate to go up to 3-cell and do some pretty extreme aerobatics. If you're watching this video right now, the Mini Explorer and also the complete Get Started kit is now available just in time for Christmas. We'll see you next time.
Now today, we're going to be building out of foam.
Now if we did everything right, everything should pop apart easy. That was really easy.
This is called the downward ring hold.